people who are darker than blue. Don't let us hang around this town and let what others say come true. We're just good for nothing. They all figure a boyish grown-up shit. Peace, everyone. Welcome to this latest episode of Darker Than Blue. It is Friday, December 12th, 2025, and I am Jackie Lukeman, your host for Darker Than Blue, the show where we talk about politics for the people that you just heard Brother Curtis Mayfield say are darker than blue. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. I've been wanting to talk about this for a minute because we are in a deeply propagandized period of time. But honestly, we live in a deeply propagandized country. We are some terribly propagandized people, and we're not alone. I think this is pretty common among most European countries. I know it's common among the colonies and the former colonies of these European countries. And we're going to get into some of this stuff, but I really wanted to talk about the propaganda that we are subjected to now and put it in a historical context that is really important. So I want to start by first apologizing for the typo in the title. Yes, I just saw that I misspelled the word prologue right before I came on air. So oops, sorry about that, y'all who are watching and viewing. This is what happens sometimes when you have a one bunny show, as Abdus used to call it. But I have been thinking about a phrase from one of my favorite, well, actually the only, yeah, I kind of like Macbeth, I guess, but one of the few Shakespeare plays that I actually like, and it's The Tempest, and the phrase that is the one that's relevant to today's discussion and very famous is what's past is prologue. That is the phrase from William Shakespeare's play The Tempest. Now, when that phrase is used in this play, it's spoken by this character named Antonio, who is a treacherous liar. He's just an awful person. And what he means is when he's saying this to Sebastian, I think is the other character's name, he is telling him that the past that they share has set the stage for their current condition, their current situation. And their current situation was the two of them basically deciding, hey, we're both at this juncture in life because of the things that we have experienced in the past. So because of this past, we learn from those lessons so we can take those lessons and apply them to us amassing the power that we think we deserve that others have used against us. Yeah, it's a pretty nasty way to use that phrase. And that's usually not the way we think of that phrase when we talk about past is prologue or what is past is prologue. But that is the context that that phrase is used in this play. And Antonio is saying that, history's lessons shape the present and the future. Like I said, even though the original context was completely manipulative, implying that the right to commit evil acts is a part of destiny, the destiny of the person using this phrase, and that destiny was shaped by that history, right? And the full line from the play actually reads, whereof what's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. Yes, I was a theater kid for a little while. Sorry. That phrase highlights that past events lead to the current moment, and what happens next is up to the character's choices. This is what Antonio is telling the other character, and he's presenting the choice for the two of them being, let's kill some people and get some power, right? That's what that phrase means in the context of that play. But in the context that we usually use it, and that I'm going to talk about tonight,
we think of it meaning history provides context and prepares us for what's to come, so we should learn from history, right? Now, it's very interesting that the original use of that phrase, what's past is prologue, is in a very manipulative, negative context where these two characters are justifying them about to commit murder to gain power, framing their ability to do this as their destiny. It's very interesting because I just found out today, doing the reading for this show, that this phrase, what's past is prologue, is inscribed on the National Archives building in Washington, D.C., here in D.C. I did not know this. And this phrase is apparently carved on the building, symbolizing history's relevance to the present and the future of this country. Really? They really put that? Okay. That's wild, but yeah. So the use of the phrase in The Tempest is a more accurate reflection of how we should think of that phrase in the context of the history of this country. It's more accurate than we realize, actually, especially when I consider that the propaganda we're subjected to in trying to justify all the hell being unleashed on earth now, compared to how propaganda was used to do the same things, whoops, in the past. It's a very interesting um, discussion going on in my head about propaganda today, propaganda yesterday, and how the history of propaganda informs the propaganda that we are subjected to now. And woo, what a tangled web we weave. Yes, another Shakespeare reference. I'm sorry. So, tonight, yes, let's talk about propaganda so we can understand a little better how deeply and thoroughly we are brainwashed to accept evil wrapped in an American flag or in a Christian cross. So let's start with defining propaganda, shall we? Propaganda is communication designed to influence people's beliefs, attitudes, or actions. The key characteristic is that it presents information selectively, often emphasizing certain facts or playing up an emotional appeal. And they do this to serve a specific agenda, whether that agenda is political, ideological, commercial, or social. The interesting thing about the word propaganda, yes, there is something interesting about the word itself, is that it originates from the Catholic Church's Congregatio de Propaganda Fide, which that's Latin, by the way, which translates to Congregation for Propagating the Faith, which was established by the Catholic Church in 1622 to promote Catholic teachings as a counter to the spread of the Reformation. Now, this organization, the Congregation for Propagating the Faith, still exists within the Catholic Church and is now known as the Dicastery for Evangelization, serving pretty much the same purpose today. Now, the word propaganda itself is neutral. It simply means to propagate or spread ideas or breed specimens of a plant or an animal by natural processes from the parent stock. That's what the word propagate also means. Like when we gardeners say, we're going to propagate new plants from cuttings of existing ones. I love doing that. Or propagating new plants from seeds. I love doing that too. So, propaganda is simply how you spread, grow, breed, cultivate, generate, reproduce, multiply information. So, all by itself, propaganda is not negative. This show is propaganda because I am spreading information and I hope you reproduce it by sharing it, right? But it is the what, why, and who of the ideas that are being propagated that indicate whether the propaganda is harmful or not. See what I did there? I thought that was very clever. I like it. So, how do we figure out how, whether propaganda is harmful or not. Let's look at a few concepts to help us do that. Look at the what, the content of the propaganda. That's the first thing we should do. True and accurate propaganda exists, like this show. Look at that. Can disseminate true and accurate propaganda, can disseminate vital public information. Some examples outside of this show are like World War II posters urging carpooling or starting a small garden to save on fuel with the carpooling, or to provide food to supplement rations for the war effort, or public health campaigns promoting vaccination. I know that word vaccination just triggered a whole bunch of people, but listen, the people in South Carolina right now whose kids are on their second measles outbreak quarantine since the start of the school season probably think a little bit differently about all that anti vaccine propaganda of late. Yeah. Then we should be asking ourselves, is the content selective or manipulative or false and misleading? Does the propaganda deliberately spread misinformation or disinformation? Does it prevent facts or a few facts but omits crucial context, or uses emotional manipulation with few or no facts? An example of this is the centuries old lie about Black people being inherently more criminal and violent than white people. This propaganda is presented and spread using crime statistics that come from a so-called legitimate source, the FBI, right? But the statistics claim to show that because more Black people are in jail or prison, that means they commit more crime. But of course, this claim leaves out key facts that change what those statistics mean, like the fact that being arrested and being in jail does not mean that you are guilty of a crime, right? Because hundreds of thousands of people are arrested and detained for a crime, but they cannot post bail, so they sit in jail until their court date, which could be years, right? So people have not been convicted of anything just because they are in jail if they have not gone to trial yet. So we don't know if everybody who is in jail has actually committed a crime or not. We just know that people have been arrested and are being detained. That information is never provided when they tell you all of the Black folks who are in jail. So we must be more criminal minded. Then there's false accusations, false arrests, violations of due process, racial profiling, racism within the legal and criminal justice system, all that good stuff. Of course, the much higher rates of poverty among Black people and the criminalization of poverty, which disproportionately impacts the same poor Black people. And of course, the people who spread this propaganda never talk about the arrest rates for white people that includes them being arrested for the vast majority of rapes and of other sexual assaults, thefts, murders of white people, because most white people who are murdered by white people, not by Black people, like the racist propagandists who spread these lies claim. Make sense? I hope so. So then I think we should look at the why, the intent or the purpose of the propaganda. Is the propaganda beneficial or pro-social? Does it promote a collective good like anti-smoking campaigns or disaster preparedness? Is it neutral or promotional? And this is common in like advertising and public relations, where a product is being marketed, or like a celebrity's image is being repaired. Yeah, like think of these silly but allegedly artistic perfume ads, these commercials that are popping up again. I hate them so much because they aren't as beautiful or compelling as the marketing gurus think they are. They're actually quite campy, and they're really kind of ridiculous, and the music is always bad. But they're trying real hard to sell that stinky alcohol smelling, way too expensive perfume. And I guess it's successful because they keep producing these ads, and that perfume keeps selling. But then think about McDonald's commercials with the hip music and the youthful energy. They're designed to make you want a genocide burger, but you better leave them alone. Y'all better leave McDonald's alone because of their complicity in this genocide. Then we should be asking, is it harmful or antisocial? Does the propaganda deceive, divide, or control, like hate propaganda, like we just talked about the racist stuff about Black people and criminality? That's that kind of thing. Or like propaganda about election interference, like the US sending a campaign team to Moscow to get Boris Yeltsin reelected rather than allow the Russians to elect a communist for president. Yes, Bill Clinton did that. Don't talk to me about Russiagate foolishness with some social media ads for shoes and Jesus memes that were supposed to compel people to vote for Trump instead of Clinton. That's the propaganda about Russiagate. The truth is that, look, if some shoe ads and Jesus memes is the best the country with the KGB can do as far as election interference is concerned, then they suck as spies. But let's be real, y'all. The propaganda about Russiagate never mentioned the kind of ads that they claimed were connected to Russia. They didn't tell you when those ads were shared. And most shoe ads and Jesus memes that were posted after the election. There were few, if any, directly political ads before or during the election, and the very, very few that did exist were click and share if you support X candidate kind of ads. The propaganda about Russiagate was meant to deceive you about its effectiveness, reach, and viability. They made it seem like it was a real thing, and it really wasn't. Oh, and the propaganda about the US interfering in Russia's election that actually led to the rise of Vladimir Putin is also designed to deceive you because it is never mentioned when discussions about election interference are engaged in the media or political environments in this country at all. Probably not even in college and university political science classes, to be honest. So then I think we need to look at the who. We need to look at the source. Is the propaganda correctly attributed to a source that can be verified? Is the propaganda attributed to an ambiguous or an unclear source? Or is the propaganda deliberately misattributed to a false source, or there is no source discernible? This last one, the last two, I think, these are the issues with so much social media propaganda today. People are just sharing stuff all over the place that makes a claim, and nobody can attribute the claim to a source, a person, an organization. It's just some meme that's supposed to be a fact that gets shared around, and then everybody internalizes it as fact without any substantiation whatsoever. So, when we are evaluating propaganda, regardless of what the propaganda is, we should be looking for transparency or deception. Ethical concerns arise when propaganda hides its source, its intent, or manipulates without consent. And pretty much everything we watch on television today and listen to on corporate radio is manipulative propaganda without consent. Look for a democratic or an authoritarian context. And this is tricky because we think we live in a democracy, but I hate to break it to you. No, I don't. We don't live in a democracy. Because in democracies, propaganda competes with a diverse group of information sources. But in authoritarian systems, propaganda is monopolistic and compulsory. This is not a democracy in this country. All corporate media tells the same lies from the empire. 90% of corporate media is owned by 6 corporations. And if Netflix is allowed to buy Warner Brothers, oh my gosh. So we definitely have a monopolistic media landscape in this country, and not just with cable, television, and radio, but also with social media, because the tech giants are called what they are for a reason. Then we should be looking at scale and power dynamics. The same techniques like emotional appeals can be used to sell charity donations, which is great, or the same emotional appeal can be used to promote genocide. And you know we're watching that right now. Power imbalances matter. Why does the state of Israel have this much power and influence over US media sources? All of them. State propaganda targeting vulnerable groups is more dangerous than citizen activism. It is. For example, the Trump regime lies about Antifa. It's not a thing, but there's no actual organization called Antifa. Anti fascism is an ideology that only fascists would oppose. But then look at the Biden regime and their lies about pro Palestine protesters being anti Semitic and attacking Jewish students on campuses when it was the Zionist students and adults attacking the pro Palestine student protesters? Or how about Hillary Clinton's lies about young people today being misled by fake videos of genocide in Gaza on Instagram and TikTok when the genocide in Gaza is real? The videos are real. The death is real. And Hillary Clinton is a bloodthirsty ghoul and a liar, and the reason Donald Trump is president. Consider the source, y'all. Does the propaganda enable informed choice, or does it bypass rational thinking through fear and hatred? I got to bring up Russiagate again because it was so successful of a lie because of the long history of anti communism and demonization of the former USSR that is still imposed upon non communist Russia today. Y'all know that Vladimir Putin is not a communist. He doesn't like communists. That man is a capitalist through and through. One successful propaganda campaign, though, in the virulent anti communism in the United States just bred another. That's all. Propaganda is essentially structured persuasion with an agenda. And that's not inherently a bad thing. Because look, if I want you to be an anti imperialist, I have to persuade you that being anti imperialist is viable, reasonable, logical, morally sound, and good for everybody else too. So, yeah, I have to structure my persuasion for people to adopt anti-imperialism because my agenda is revolution. So that's not a bad thing. Well, it's not a bad thing for me, and certainly not a bad thing for most of you who are listening, I'm sure. But a structured persuasion with an agenda can be a negative thing depending on what the agenda is. Because, like fire or rhetoric, it's a tool whose morality depends on its use. Are you going to use that torch to start a bonfire for us to cook some hot dogs and s'mores around? Or are you going to use it to burn down somebody's house? The most dangerous propaganda isn't necessarily the most obviously false, but rather that which systematically distorts understanding while appearing reasonable, especially when it comes from trusted sources, or, this is the big one, exploits existing biases. In this information saturated age, developing media literacy to be able to recognize propaganda techniques, regardless of whether we agree with the message or not, is increasingly crucial for our very survival. Now, when we think of propaganda, we often think of the Nazi regime, don't we? Because their use of propaganda was systematic, sophisticated, and integral to its rise to power, consolidation of control, and execution of its ideologies, including the Holocaust. It wasn't merely advertising the propaganda of the Nazis, but it was an all encompassing effort to shape reality, thought, and behavior. Joseph Goebbels, the Reich Minister of Public Engagement and Propaganda, was its chief architect, operating on the principle, listen, that a lie repeated often enough becomes the truth. Mm-hmm. That's where you heard that from before. Now, how did they spread their ideas to become global messaging that endures to this day among fascists and bigots, though? How? How did they spread these lies and this hate? And what are some of the modern examples of some of those tactics and strategies that we might identify with, recognize today, and agree with, and might not have thought about or realized at all? We're going to get into that on the other side of this break. You know, we are just at 30 minutes, just about rather at 30 minutes past the hour. It is time for a station break. So, engineer extraordinaire, what do we have on tap for the people today?
If you're a dancer or just a fan, the Way You Move Festival is coming to Washington, D.C. with jams, competitions, and classes. December 13th through the 16th. Whether you're into hip-hop, house, breaking, popping, or locking, we've got you covered with top-notch Small Fries Edition, all-styles dance jam and competition for youth ages 17 and under on the 13th at Edgewood Arts Center. Freshest of all time, 2vs2 breaking battle, ages 18 and up, also on the 13th at the Black Cat. The world-famous Juice to Boot 2vs2 competition, DC prelims, on the 14th at The Reach. And masterclasses with international Juice to Boot judges on the 15th and 16th. All in Washington, D.C., all family-friendly, December 13th through 16th. Additional event and registration information at wblinc.org/thewayyoumove. Brought to you by the Words Beats and Life nonprofit.
Ooh, thank you so much. That sounds like so much fun. I have to put on my extra arthritis cream and probably go check that out, because the way these knees are like, no, ma'am, no. But I can't help myself. I have to go dance. So I think that's great. All right. Thank you so much for that announcement. And for those of you who are just joining, either on the radio, WPFW 89.3 FM, on the app that I hope you have downloaded, online, WPFW fm.org, or on YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram. Thank you for joining. This is Jackie Lukman. This is Darker Than Blue. And we are talking about how to spot bad propaganda. So, specifically, we're going to get into how the Nazis spread their propaganda as widely and as efficiently and effectively as they did. So, and let me just say, for those who are just joining, I am not celebrating the Nazis. I am talking about how they propagandized the world, basically. So they focused on their core principles and their goals. They did this by simplification and repetition. Complex issues were reduced to simple emotional slogans like Ein Volk, Ein Reich, Ein Führer, one people, one empire, one leader. Now, does Make America Great Again sound a little bit different? They created a common enemy. They united the population against defined enemies of the state, which were Jews, yes, but remember, it was also communists, liberals, Slavs, homosexuals, the disabled. I think we'd only have to take one word out of that list today, and that's Slavs, probably. Otherwise, every group that was considered the enemy of the Nazis is also considered enemies of the U.S. today, like anti-Zionist Jews, communists, socialists, so-called liberals, homosexuals, transgender people, the disabled. But now we're going to add immigrants from the global south and Muslim majority darker nations, something called Antifa, woke leftists, black identity extremists, DEI. You see what you want. Okay. They also had a cult of personality. Adolf Hitler was portrayed as an infallible, messianic figure, the savior of Germany. Where are we seeing that at? Huh. I know you're thinking Trump, but I'm really going to tick people off now. We actually saw it in the way people treated Obama, like he was the savior of America. awarding him the Nobel Peace Prize for just being elected president, as if being born in black skin automatically made him an emissary of peace. And we saw how that worked out, didn't we? Then, of course, there's Trump. Trump is treated the same way by different people for different reasons from the reason people treated Obama the way they did, like he was the leader of a cult of personality. Trump is absolutely the leader of a cult of personality. And he is definitely seen as the messiah of white Christian America. Two cults of personality that hold little to no room for legitimate criticism of the personality. Obama and Trump, opposite ends of the same cult of personality spectrum. That's my argument, and I'm sticking with it. But the Nazis also eliminated all alternative viewpoints by controlling all media and cultural outlets. They controlled information. They weren't. They were not the only people to have done this. And I know, again, you're thinking Trump, but remember, Obama spoke in favor of free expression, but what he really did was to pursue an unprecedented number of leak prosecutions under the Espionage Act, more than any previous administrations combined, and this led to a paralyzing climate of fear for sources and reporters. He set a record for censoring or denying access to information requested under the Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA. The Associated Press reported that officials were reluctant to discuss even unclassified information in the Obama administration, fearing investigations. He directed the National Security Agency and the FBI to improperly search and disseminate intelligence on Americans, violating their civil liberty protections, and he threatened investigative journalism and investigative journalist sources who might otherwise expose government actions through the his administration's policies around classification of information and the prosecution of whistleblowers. And Obama also spoke out against reviving the Fairness Doctrine, a government regulation that had previously required broadcasters to present opposing views, which critics viewed as a potential tool for suppressing political dissent. Obama didn't want the media to present opposing views to his administration. Why else would you not want fairness in media coverage unless you just don't want the media covering you? And then, of course, there's Biden. Remember the 2022 Department of Homeland Security Disinformation Governance Board that Biden established? It didn't live long because there was a lot of resistance to it. And the Department of Homeland Security finally had to shutter the project. It was launched in April 2022. It was immediately characterized as Biden's Ministry of Truth by most Republicans, but also by us radical organizers who knew that's what it was. And it didn't help that the person Biden named to be the head of the board was Nina Jankowicz, an author and so-called disinformation expert who, it was revealed, had previously worked for the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry as a lobbyist targeting Russia and Belarus with democracy assistance programs while promoting disinformation about those countries herself. And she also worked for the UK's Integrity Initiative, which was a shadowy influence operation that meddled with the political process in the UK and abroad under the guise of defending democracy again. And of course there's Trump. Of course there's Trump. I'm not excluding him. What free expression under Trump? This is the man who the ACLU right now is condemning him for his attacks on press freedom, against NPR, PBS through funding cuts, lawsuits against news outlets like the New York Times, the controversy with Pete Hegseth and the loyalty oath, or whatever you want to call the document that they are forcing journalists who cover the Department of Defense to sign in order to be able to cover the Department of Defense, and they're being sued for that. Of course, Trump. Of course, he is absolutely guilty of eliminating all dissent against him. All right? So this is something that is absolutely not new. in this country. The Nazis, I won't even say they started it, but they're not the only ones. The Nazis also exercised mass media control. This is how they were able to eliminate all dissent. They controlled newspapers and magazines. The Nazi Party owned its own papers. Non-Nazi papers were shut down or brought under strict censorship. The People's Receiver was a cheap, mass-produced radio designed to receive only Nazi-approved stations. Hitler's speeches were broadcast nationally on those radios and throughout the other, or the traditional media outlet that was fully controlled by the Nazis by that time. How about film? Leni Riefenstahl's Triumph of the Will, that was released in 1934, is a masterpiece of propaganda filmmaking, glorifying the Nazi Party and its Nuremberg rally. Have you ever watched that thing? If you take it out of the context of what it's about, it really is an amazing piece of cinematography. But in the context of fire and rhetoric being used for either good or evil, in the case of this amazing film, it was absolutely used for evil. As amazing a piece of cinematography as it was and is. Then there's music and art. Nazis created and promoted this mythic, heroic Aryan ideal, and they promoted it through music and art while condemning degenerate art, like modern, abstract, and of course, Jewish-influenced works. Now, if we keep believing that movies, books, and music are not vehicles that convey somebody else's ideas into our consciousness, we don't understand that we are all already deeply indoctrinated through those very mediums. See, this is why that celebrity who I keep confusing with the other one, I think Nicki Minaj. I think I got it right this time. This is why Nicki Minaj repeating the lie of a Christian genocide committed by Muslims in Nigeria, or whichever one it was, I don't know, at the United Nations, is such a problem. That is an example of propaganda. And Pharrell Williams saying politics isn't real today after he helped raise millions of dollars for the Israeli occupation force in 2018. I mean, politics were real enough in 2018 for you to do it, for you to participate in a political event, to raise money for a political purpose. But today, when you're asked about political issues that matter, oh, politics aren't real today. These folks are not just celebrities gone rogue or wrong. They are conveying the ideology of the ruling class that they answer to, period. Your favorite celebrities do not answer to you, y'all. Stop expecting them to think like you and believe the same things about life and your material conditions and the politics that inform them. Stop thinking they see things the way that you do. They don't live lives like ours at all. And then further, a new Roosevelt Institution report called The Political Economy of the U.S. Media System, Excavating the Roots of the Present Crisis, reveal how decades of market-first policymaking has systematically eroded the media's democratic function, leaving the press structurally vulnerable at precisely the moment when independent journalism matters most. The authors trace a troubling trajectory, consolidation that concentrated power in fewer hands, the abandonment of meaningful public interest standards, and the rise of platform monopolies with virtually no accountability. They say that the recent controversy surrounding the late night comedians and the proposed Corporation for Public Broadcasting defunding are not isolated incidents. They're symptoms of a deeper structural crisis when commercial imperatives, capitalism, override democratic needs, profit over people, and when policymakers treat media as just another market rather than essential civic infrastructure, we create a media system susceptible to pressure from all directions. So, then the Nazis used the power of symbols and spectacle. We're all familiar with the swastika, the Nazi salute, the uniforms and flags created a powerful visual identity and sense of belonging. This is still used today, though. Not with that particular imagery, but think about the tributes to the military and the service members at sporting events. From the presenting of the flag with the military color guard and all that pomp and circumstance, to the unfurling of the gigantic flag on the field pre-game, while the singing of the national anthem is done and the compulsory standing and putting the hands over the hearts of at least the athletes, but the people in the stands, they catch heat too from all the other indoctrinated people who just automatically stand up, put their hand over their heart, and are looking for who is not complying. Brown shirts in training, y'all. Brown shirts in training. This big spectacle of pro-military consensus building, I don't see it as all that different from the symbolism and the pageantry that the Nazis used. It's along the same line to me. But then the Nazis also did these massive, meticulously choreographed rallies, like at Nuremberg, that Leni Riefenstahl documented in her movie. And they created an overwhelming sense of power, unity, and destiny. There were theatrical events designed to dissolve the individual identity into the mass identity, right? I don't know that we have a whole lot like that today on that scale, but we do have the written word and rhetoric, because Hitler's speeches, he was a master orator who used rhythm, pauses, escalation, body language to whip crowds into a frenzy. Then books, Mein Kampf, obviously became a virtual Bible for fascists. Other scientific books promoted racist pseudoscience, children's literature. Yeah, the Nazis had children's books, like The Poisonous Mushroom, that taught children to hate and fear Jews through fairy tale like stories. They had specific messaging that they used to target specific groups, like the youth. The Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls indoctrinated children from a young age with ideology, militarism, and loyalty to Hitler. Doesn't that sound like Turning Point USA? Or JROTC in middle and high school? Or ROTC on college campuses? They targeted women too with propaganda, glorifying women as mothers of the Aryan race, Kinder, Kuche, Kirche. That's what they called it. Children, kitchen, church. That's what that means. And breeders for the state. Ooh, doesn't that sound familiar? Don't that sound familiar? Do you want to know why this administration celebrated and was instrumental in overturning Roe versus Wade, but they are also supporting and funding IVF? This is why. Kinder, Kuche, Kirche. Children, kitchen, church. How their propaganda evolved and escalated, it's an amazing timeline. Pre-1933, the rise to power, they focused on blaming the Jews and the November criminals, the politicians who signed the Treaty of Versailles. 1933 to 1939, they shifted to portraying Hitler as the benevolent father of the nation, portraying Germany as a peaceful but strong community, and Jews as a parasitic, corrupting force. It aimed to normalize discrimination through the Nuremberg laws and build public acceptance for war as necessary for Lebensraum, or living space. 1939 to 1945, they downplayed the setbacks of the war, glorified the military, dehumanized the enemies, especially the Soviets, as subhuman, and concealed the true nature of the Holocaust from the German public while they continued to justify persecution. This was so effective. This propaganda campaign was so effective because there was no escape from any of it. It permeated every aspect of life, work, school, leisure, media. They covered everything. It exploited real grievances. It challenged genuine national humiliation because the Treaty of Versailles was trash. But and the economic suffering that was real, but they turned that into hatred against people who were not responsible for those things. There was blame for the humiliation, but it wasn't Jews or Roma or disabled or homosexuals or any of the victims of genocide who actually caused the humiliation that the Germans were imposed, that was imposed upon them. And they used modern techniques. They were early adopters of radio, film, and aviation. Did you know Hitler was the first politician to use aircraft for campaigning? He was. True. So, the legacy and the relevance of this to today is that Nazi propaganda remains the paradigmatic, I think that's how you pronounce that word, a case study of how modern media and psychological techniques can be weaponized by a totalitarian state. Yes, that's what we live in. It's a stark warning about the dangers of state controlled media, the power of repeated lies, the use of spectacle over substance, and the critical need for media literacy and robust independent journalism in a healthy society. Its techniques, simplification, demonization, charismatic cultism, are still studied and, unfortunately, as we should clearly be able to see, are still employed by authoritarian movements, this government today. It's important to understand, though, that the core propaganda tactics used by the Nazis were not invented by them. They were refined, modernized, and industrialized from a long historical playbook, much of which was developed and practiced in colonial contexts. Ooh, here's the good part. Colonial powers systematically used propaganda, ideological constructs, and psychological manipulation to justify conquest, maintain control, and extract resources. The parallels are striking and reveal a direct lineage of ideas and methods. So here's how colonial powers prefigured Nazi tactics, creating a civilizing mission versus a master race. The colonial tactic included the white man's burden from Britain and mission civilisatrice from France. These were like the ideological frameworks of colonialism. They portrayed colonialization or colonization not as exploitation or occupation or anything bad, but as a noble duty to bring civilization, Christianity, and progress to savage or backward people. The Nazi parallel of this is the Nazi concept of Lebensraum, or living space, and the racial duty of the Aryan master race to subjugate and reorder inferior Slavic peoples in Eastern Europe. In both cases, a supremacist ideology justified conquest and genocide as a historical necessity and a moral duty for the superior group. What's the modern parallel? You ought to have figured it out by now. Deport all illegal immigrants campaigns based on protecting America and Americans and American land from defilement from the darker others. European immigrants, interestingly, are largely not being deported or being demanded to be deported. White immigrants are welcome. And white people are now saying, we didn't steal the land, we conquered it when they talk about this place. They don't see anything wrong with what was done or how it was done. They know because they've been using this propaganda the whole time. We did what we had to do to get the space that we needed to live free. Then there's a scientific racism and dehumanization. The colonial tactic is when the colonizers relied on pseudoscience, checking my time, phrenology, social Darwinism, anthropometry, probably pronounced that wrong, but you know what garbage race science. I was going to say a word that I can't say on the air to prove the biological inferiority of colonized people like Africans, Native Americans, Aboriginal Australians. You know what I mean. This was taught in universities, displayed in museums, used in popular media. Indigenous people were routinely described as vermin, pests, or savages, less than fully human. And you know what they called us. Nazi parallels? The Nazis used virtually identical racial science to classify Jews, Roma, and Slavs, who were like Russians and Czechs and that kind of thing, as Untermenschen or subhumans, a parasite or bacillus, a bacteria infecting the body of the Germans of the Volk. The dehumanizing language of calling people vermin or disease was directly borrowed from colonial rhetoric. And today, Central American immigrants, Somalians, Haitians, all dark people are considered subhuman garbage from S-hole countries, whiners, burdens on society, lazy, drunk Indians, savages, the same language and sentiment from colonizers that the Nazis used, but now lies about the inherent criminality and laziness, lack of intelligence or qualification, or innate uncleanliness and lack of culture of everybody who is not European descended, using the same pseudoscience, manipulated statistics, and fake explanations for racial differences to justify the hatred of those people. Then, of course, there's divide and rule, creating internal enemies, absolutely a colonial tactic. Divide and rule through creating an internal enemy is a classic imperial strategy that they still use against us today, and we keep still falling for it. The British in India and Rwanda, Burundi, and the Belgians in Rwanda exacerbated ethnic, religious, or caste divisions, like between the Hutu and the Tutsi, or the Hindus and the Muslims, to prevent unified resistance to their colonization and occupation and oppression, and to make governance easier for a small foreign elite. They don't have to do too much if they've convinced us that we are each other's enemies and we start killing each other. Well, what do they have to do but sit there and look? The Nazi parallel, while the Nazis sought to eliminate internal diversity, they also exploited existing social divisions like the long-standing anti-Semitism in Europe and created new categories of enemies within: Jews, communists, homosexuals, to unify the Aryan majority against them. And today, well, it's white America versus Antifa, woke left extremists, DEI hires, the feminist army, communist, socialist, black identity extremists, non-Christians, etc., etc. And the colonial tactic of controlling history and symbols, oh boy. Colonizers systematically destroyed or appropriated indigenous cultural heritage, banned languages, rewrote history to present pre-colonial history as a blank slate or a period of barbarism, framing colonization as the start of real history. The Nazi parallel: the Nazis burned un-German books, promoted a mythologized ancient German past that never existed, and condemned modern art as degenerate. Both sought to erase or vilify competing cultural narratives and create a state-approved historical myth. We have never truly undone the colonial history of this country. We still believe much of the lies that were created about it. This regime is obviously trying to end any rectification of those lies, but it is not the pioneer in spreading or protecting them. We've never rectified the lies that the colonial powers told about their rise to power, over whom and how they did it. We have no real understanding that the South has actually won, because our understanding of history is informed by lost cause mythology that is the state approved historical myth of this country. You're going to have to look the lost cause up on your own, folks, because I am out of time. This connection between the history of colonization and fascism and authoritarianism and propaganda must be studied in the context of colonial history. We cannot talk about this repression and authoritarianism and the violation of rights and genocide and everything we are faced with today if we do not understand that it has its roots in colonial history and the propaganda that came out of it that we are still living today. I'm out of time for Darker Than Blue. Thank you so much for joining me. But hey, you all who are on video, stick around. We got a little bit more to cover. And for those of you who are listening on the radio, you can get this additional information by going to Black Liberation Media on YouTube, on Facebook, or on Instagram. Thanks so much. A luta continua, the struggle continues, but if we keep telling the truth, victory is certain. Victoria asserta. Peace. Until next time. All right, y'all. I had such a good time putting this together that I got carried away like I usually do. So I didn't want to let this go to waste. So let's finish up because there's more to say. There's so much more to say. And I'm checking your comments over here, and there's a part of my anatomy that is round and prodigious that you may affix your lips to if you do not like the truth. That's where I'm going to leave that. All right. So the Nazis, when they spread their propaganda, they learned from the colonial era the use of spectacle and public ritual, because this was a colonial tactic also with their imperial ceremonies, like in India, military parades, and monumental architecture like New Delhi or the Colonial Center in Algiers, right? They were designed to overwhelm the subjects of the colony, the occupied people, to overwhelm them with the power and the permanence and the grandeur of the colonizer, to literally remind people, we are more powerful than you. You will never defeat us. We are never going anywhere. So you might as well just enjoy the scenery. What's the Nazi parallel? We already said the Nuremberg rallies, the monumental architecture of Albert Speer, and the elaborate party rituals serve the exact same purpose: to inspire awe, enforce conformity, and demonstrate invincible power. What does that look like today? Well, speaking of the lost cause mythology, those Confederate statutes, the statues, Lord, not statutes, might as well be, but statues that no administration has moved to take down. No politician. It's always been the people. But why are they important? And we didn't get this discourse right. Then I don't think we did a good enough job of explaining why the statues need to come down. Because they are the same kind of propaganda that the Nazis used and the colonists used. They overwhelmingly are of generals and politicians, these statues. They're not of, just common people. So they celebrate the leadership of the Confederacy. These Confederate statues do. And many people who defend these statues say that they represent the history of this country and not hate. But let's be clear that history is taught in books, museums, and classrooms with context, nuance, multiple perspectives, and facts. Propaganda is erected in public squares to inspire uncritical reverence and enforce a single, triumphant, overpowering narrative. This is absolutely true of these statues, because most Confederate statues were erected decades after the Civil War, and they were not erected to honor dead soldiers, but to intimidate Black people and cement a political ideology during periods of intense racial conflict after Reconstruction in this country, namely Jim Crow, the Civil Rights era, the Black Power era. And they still stand and are defended with the intensity that they are for the same reasons today. So, can we please stop arguing with these people about what these statues actually represent? I don't give a damn if they think they represent their history. You can look at a picture of your racist ass general, your racist ass ancestor, your genocidal ass ancestor. You can look at a picture of him. My tax dollars don't have to fund and prop him up in the middle of a public park where I take my kids. Well, I don't have any kids, but I have cousins and nephews and my dog. I don't want to see that shit. Because you know what? It's a part of my history, but it's not a part of my history that I celebrate or would revere. So, what the hell does that mean in a country where the people who were oppressed by these folks, the descendants of the people who were oppressed by these people these statues represent, have to pay to keep them maintained? What the? Get the fuck out of here with your it's heritage, not hate bullshit. That lie in itself is also propaganda. Then the colonial tactic of using the law to create this propaganda and to spread it. Colonies were built on legal apartheid, like the Natives Land Act in South Africa, Jim Crow laws here in the US, which is a form of internal colonization, and the Code de Indigent, Indigenat, oh gosh, me and the foreign words, in French Algeria, all created separate, inferior legal statuses for native populations. The Nazi parallel is obviously the Nuremberg laws, which were introduced in 1935, which stripped Jews of citizenship and forbade marriage between Jews and Aryans. But those laws, did you know that those laws were explicitly modeled on American Jim Crow laws and colonial race statutes? And Nazi lawyers openly studied these things. They didn't even hide the fact that this is where they got it from, Jim Crow and the colonial period. Today, the justification for the deputized race soldiers and militia members stopping people suspected of being illegal immigrants based on how they look, similar. Although this is not legal because racial profiling is supposed to be illegal in this country, but who's stopping them from doing it? Who? Who? If the law is not going to stop them, then the law might as well not exist. The German Empire itself, it is, I think, important to understand, was itself a colonial power in Africa. And this was in 1904, 1908. Remember, in Namibia, well, not remember, but you've heard the story. I hope you know this history. Germany in Namibia carried out a genocide of the Herero and Nama people, and that genocide against those people carried out in Namibia between 1904 and 1908 is considered to be the first genocide of the 20th century. Many Nazi officials, including Hermann Goring, whose father was a colonial governor, and Franz Ritter von Epp, had direct colonial backgrounds. And Hitler himself admired and referenced colonial models. He famously praised the efficiency of British rule in India and saw the American westward expansion and near extermination of Native Americans as a model for acquiring living space in the East. So you need to understand the context here. A 2022 study in an outlet called World Development estimated that British colonial policies caused 50 to 165 million excess deaths in India between 1881 and 1920 alone, largely due to forced grain exports They literally took the food that was being grown for the people in India and exported it so that the colony, the British colony, could make money, and ended up starving the Indian people. And the British colony didn't give a damn. And economic policies that decimated local living standards. Hitler praised the efficiency of that. And then the concept of a racial state was perfected in colonial laboratories before being imported back to Europe. Yeah, the scramble for Africa, the scramble for China, the scramble over Korea, the separation of all colonial projects. And this racial state, they were all imposed, all practiced, all tried out and perfected in these colonial laboratories. Historians like Jürgen Zimmerer and A. Dirk Moses argue that the Holocaust cannot be fully understood outside of the colonial paradigm. They see it as a terrifying fusion of modern industrial bureaucracy with a colonial mindset of racial annihilation brought home to Europe. So today, Zionist Israelis are doing this in Gaza. The European Jews who fled the Nazis to Palestine colonized it after the Palestinians welcomed them and gave them a place of refuge. They did. That was always the intention. And that is documented, the colonization of Palestine by European Jews. I'm sorry, by European Zionist Jews. Colonization is, by design and intention, a genocidal process to replace the indigenous population of a land with a foreign population to take control of the land. The Zionists always intended to genocide the Palestinian Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and other population. And they know that there are Muslims, Jews, and Christians and other folks, and they know. They are simply no longer lying about their intentions. That's all. So the Nazis did not create their propaganda playbook from scratch. They were avid students of colonial history. They took the tools of dehumanization, racial hierarchy, territorial conquest, justified by ideology and population management developed in the colonies, removed their geographical distance, and applied them with industrialized efficiency to European populations. So while the Nazi implementation was uniquely horrific in its scale, no, not uniquely horrific in its scale, because King Leopold's genocide was, we're talking 10 million. Okay. And we never talk about Holocaust in the context of Congo and Leopold, because again, the propaganda, it was okay. It was accepted. It was necessary to bring progress to these savages in the Congo. That's why. And the victims of the genocide were African. So what genocide? They were savages that needed to be forced to work to create the wealth that Belgium realized through the progress they brought to Congo. So killing those 10 million Congolese was a cost of doing business. So the ideological and tactical roots of Nazi propaganda of that machine are deeply embedded in the centuries-old practices of European colonialism and white supremacy. This is why I have a serious problem with people who cannot talk about fascism without talking about Europe, because their only context for fascism is Nazi Germany. But the Nazi German fascists centered their fascism in colonialism. What the fuck is wrong with y'all? Recognizing this lineage is crucial to understanding that the Holocaust was not an isolated historical aberration. Fascism didn't start in Nazi Germany. It didn't start in Mussolini's Italy either. but rather the ultimate logical conclusion of ideologies and practices that had long been deemed acceptable when applied to non European peoples by Europeans in their colonies. Now, why can't we recognize any of this anywhere as the existential threat that it is today? Because I swear to God, we can't. It's because the US is not just the Nazi prototype, but it is also their rescuer. I'm thinking specifically of something called Operation Paperclip, which was a highly secretive US intelligence program conducted at the end of World War II and went into the Cold War to recruit scientists, engineers, and technicians from guess where? Nazi Germany, including many who were former members of they were Nazis. They were Nazis. The name Paperclip came from the paperclips attached to the files of desired scientists, marking them for immediate processing. Get them on in here. Hurry up. Find them and get them in here. So how did Operation Paperclip operate? It officially lasted from 1945 to about 1959. 1959. Through though its peak was in the immediate post-war years, but for quite a few years after, they didn't see a Nazi scientist they didn't like. The goal was to deny Nazi scientific expertise to the Soviet Union and acquire it for the United States to gain a decisive technological advantage in the nascent Cold War that was just emerging. Over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and their families, which ended up being about over 5,000 people, 5,000 fucking Nazis. Yes, their families and their kids and their pets too were brought to the US under this Operation Paperclip. Some of the key figures: Werner von Braun and his rocket team, who developed the V2 rocket that was used to bomb the shit out of London. And it was developed using slave labor from the concentration camps. The US knew this, and they gave him the golden ticket to come over here anyway. Aviation experts, chemical weapons developers, and medical researchers. But President Truman had issued an order barring entry to the United States of any former Nazi Party members or active supporters. But the U.S. Army, particularly the Joint Intelligence Objectives Agency, or JIOA, whitewashed their records and downplayed or just outright took out their Nazi affiliations and the war crimes they committed. And honestly, Truman knew, and he was fine with that program, because the whole point of inviting the Nazis, the smart Nazis, the STEM Nazis. I just amuse myself a lot with that one, the STEM Nazis. Yeah, but in the whole point of inviting the STEM Nazis to work for the United States was to own the Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So then the US government actively rebranded former Nazis as benign, apolitical German scientists, right? This historical revisionism. And these people are useful narratives. Werner von Braun, I said, became a celebrated American hero because he's the father of the US space program. He worked for NASA, while his direct involvement with the SS and the Mittelbau Dora slave labor camp was blacked out of the record, of the documented record. Everybody knew. Everybody in the government knew who this man was, what he did, and what the rest of those 1,600 Nazis did, and what their 5,000 Nazi family members supported. Well, they knew. What does this look like today? To me, I think this speaks to how national narratives are crafted, right? it raises questions about who we choose to celebrate. Think about those Confederate monuments. Why the fuck are we still fighting? But arguing with people about why we should not have monuments up to people who were traitors to this alleged country, to the point where they seceded from the Union and chose to fight a war to keep our ancestors enslaved. The only reason this argument persists is because there is a refusal to actually deal with the truth, because we keep engaging in the propaganda these lost cause freaks keep spewing about these murderous, genocidal, racist motherfuckers on these horses in these statues. That's the only reason we keep having this conversation about these damn statues. So this is how history is whitewashed for convenience. And it shows the danger of separating great achievements of people, like the way people always talk about Cecil Rhodes and people always celebrate. I saw this what was it? Some a reel, I think, of a young African sister who was just accepted as a Rhodes Scholar, and people would, oh, this is great. This is the first a young woman from this African nation. It's like, why are you celebrating Cecil Rhodes still? You know why we're still celebrating Cecil Rhodes? Do you know why we're still saying, oh, the Rhodes Scholar is such an honor? Because there has been so much propaganda about Cecil Rhodes's great achievements and no conversation, no real conversation about the truth of what he did and who he did it to and how. Propaganda. The fact that we still think the Rhodes Scholarship is a great thing is because the propaganda around Cecil Rhodes is that powerful, and it is still upheld. And it's this is all a case study in how governments and media can reshape public perception of the worst people on the planet. This is why we still call these slave owning bastards who wrote some documents that they founded this country. This is why people still call these motherfuckers founding fathers. They were slaveholders, they were child rapists, they were murderers, they were torturers. Why are we celebrating them as if the document they wrote somehow overshadows the centuries of degradation and evil that they contributed to, and that their actions continue to perpetuate? They knew they lied when they wrote those documents. They knew damn well. When they wrote "we the people," they didn't mean all the people. They didn't mean women. They didn't mean the indigenous, and they didn't mean our ancestors. So no, they were talking about we, the landowning white men, the people. We the people, the landowning white men. That's who they meant. And in the Constitution, why did it have to be amended so many times? Because when they wrote it, they did not intend for any of those rights to extend to anybody outside of landowning white men. And the reason the Constitution continues to be amended, or has been amended, instead of outright redone, which is entirely possible because we've seen countries do it: Cuba, Venezuela. The only reason it hasn't been completely redone is, again, because of the propaganda, mythologizing this document and the people who created it and their ideals that are allegedly so lofty that were all a bunch of bullshit, racist ass lies. So we can never get to what we want our society shaping documents to say, because we won't deal with the truth about the documents that exist and how they came about. We're still stuck in the colonial propaganda about these things. So the relevance of all of this today is, it should be, a reminder that the choices made in the name of competition and progress, yeah, they do have long-lasting moral consequences. They don't just shape society and policy, but a nation's soul, I guess. If you believe in that kind of thing, I don't think this country has a soul. Because Gog and Magog, no soul. But it absolutely affects a country's historical memory. And it absolutely affects how the people in that country see themselves and see the rest of the world, which means it influences how people engage with other people. And why? For what reasons? It serves as a stark warning of what can be rationalized in a state of perceived perpetual existential threat. And doesn't that feel like where we are right now? The US's whitewashing of Israel's genocide in Gaza, the implication of Israel in the genocide in Congo, the warmongering in Sudan, the Zionist attacks on any country that they want to for whatever reason, and the US whitewashing all of it, is connected to this colonial history of propaganda and the tactics of propaganda that come out of the colonial period to sanitize the blanketing trail of blood that the truth reveals. The country whose history of systematic and systemic, I said what I said, systematic and systemic racist violence against Native Americans and Africans that inspired the Nazis is also inspiring the victims of the Nazis, European Zionist Jews, to carry out the same racist violence against Palestinians. What kind of fucked up timeline is this? I think we need to spend more time learning and understanding colonial history and its ravages, telling the truth about it, correcting the record about it, standing on the truth of it in the context of every country that it impacted, every nation, every continent. And I think we need to do this so we can better recognize what it is we are facing today. We are facing the exact same ideology and strategy and tactics, and if we are not careful, the same outcomes as what the colonial powers imposed and justified through their propaganda. And remember that the United States is a colonial, this is a settler colony. So the same things that the colonies carried out and justified through their racist and violent genocidal propaganda inspired the Nazis, inspired the Zionists, and it's being unleashed upon us. Always has been, because this place, this is the mother of settler colonies. And if we don't understand that that is what this country is, it's not a beacon of freedom, it's not a beacon of democracy, it's none of those things. Settler colony is the founding ideology. Colonialism is the founding ideology of this country. And that means white supremacy and genocide, apartheid, and second-class citizenship for the occupied or worse. It means concentration camps and mass incarceration. It means scapegoating populations and demonizing and dehumanizing entire groups of people. It absolutely means genocide. It's white supremacy, it's land theft, it's degradation. That's what this country was founded on. And if we are not clear about the real history of how this place was colonized, we will never be able to recognize fascism when it throws us in a fucking concentration camp, which is exactly where we are. So, thank y'all for hanging out with me tonight on Darker Than Blue in this extended dark room. Just I see y'all in the it's really, I find it amusing. Like there's my time is precious. I get one shot at this life. I don't know about the rest of you. I don't know, how what your existence setup is, but I get one chance at this life. And I've come to realize that I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time on things that do not benefit me, don't give me anything I need, don't give me, if you ain't paying my mortgage, you ain't putting food in my refrigerator. You're not buying my favorite little things. You're not supplying me with my nightcaps. You're not contributing anything to my life, but you have time to sit on a stream and and be contrarian and contradict and insult and say nasty things to people that you don't agree with. Really? That's what you want to do at your time? Okay. You do what works for you. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna be back next week. I'm gonna be back next week. And although you might want to wish that you had just deported us all, motherfucker, you didn't. You wish you had never brought us. I'm sure your ancestors are like, damn it, that was a bad idea. Your ancestors shouldn't have been as lazy as they were. That's the real problem. That's the real thing. You want to talk about who's really lazy? The colonizers. Because they talked about how, oh, it's our divine right, it's our divine responsibility to come and develop this land because these savages aren't doing anything with it. Well, they didn't develop shit. They forced our ancestors to come over here and do the developing. These people wouldn't have never had rice if it wasn't for us. Wouldn't have had tobacco, wouldn't have had tea. Motherfuckers wouldn't have had sugar. Your babies would have been fed. You wouldn't have ate. And you go sit there and talk about, we should have deported you all. Yeah, all those conversations had them and gone. And we're still here. So maybe if your ancestors hadn't have been the lazy, greedy bastards that they were, having been kicked out of Europe for being lazy, greedy bastards who tried to overthrow systems and traditions in Europe, or who were just mad because they were still poor despite how hard they worked, because that was the Dutch. So instead of them either staying the hell where they were and figuring it out, how to get along in those systems, they came over here with their lazy asses and said, yeah, this work needs to be done, but I don't want to do it. Oh, I know, let's get the darkies. You stupid motherfucker. We should have just deported you all. But you didn't, did you? You didn't. So, all right. I appreciate y'all so much. I'm going to go back through these comments and look at some of this stupid shit people. Because, folks, I want us to stop being angry at these people. I really do. I want us to start laughing at them because they are as ridiculous as they are. I'm not saying that we should not take them seriously because they are dangerous, right? We are talking about fascists and Nazis here. Right now. I'm not talking about the history of the past. I'm talking about the people right now, like some of these folks in this in this chat. Fascists and Nazis. That's all they are. colonizing fascists and Nazis. And while we should laugh at their ridiculous claims, their ridiculous ahistorical lies, and their racist ass claims, we also need to understand that these people are dangerous. But we don't have to entertain their bullshit and try to convince them that they're wrong. No, they know they're wrong. They know they're wrong. And they're going to die angry, and they're going to be miserable for most of their lives, because they really do believe that we are taking something from them, but the people who are taking from them are the people they want to be like, the ruling class. We're not making legislation that has not raised the minimum wage for 45, 50 years. We didn't do that. We didn't buy up all of the empty houses in the country, keeping them from people who need houses, homeless people, and then marking the price up so that even people who work can't afford that. We didn't do that. That wasn't us. We didn't do that. You know, there's this big thing now where folks are really, they're really, really upset about child sex trafficking. We didn't traffic y'all's little precious children. We didn't do that. But y'all sure as hell trafficked ours, didn't you? Yeah, you did. Uh-huh. Where do you think all these light-skinned people came from? And we're all from Africa. And y'all got the nerve to be mad about some child sex trafficking. We didn't do that. Farmers are having a problem. Farmers are mad because of the tariffs. We didn't take money from farmers. We we are not ripping you off. We ain't taking shit from you. Most of y'all don't even live around us, so you don't know anything about us. You only know the propaganda you are told about us, and you believe that shit like it's gospel. I'm not here to disabuse you of it. I believe what you want. But that doesn't make you or your comments or your perspective anything that I have to take seriously or pay any attention to. Because if you're going to spend this amount of time, effort, and energy to come in here and do the things y'all like, shit, get a fucking life. Damn, are you married? Do you have somebody? Go on a date. Go out of your house. Jesus Christ. So I've been wanting to talk about um this propaganda thing for a while, because we get propaganda very wrong. We really do not understand that propaganda in and of itself, it's not a bad thing. This is propaganda. Teach-ins that the Black Alliance for Peace does, that's propaganda. The statements we produce, propaganda. We are providing, we are spreading, we are reproducing, we're sharing, we're growing, we are we are distributing information. And we use facts, we use verifiable sources, we create links, we provide links to those sources so you can see the sources yourselves. And then we provide transparency so you can go and fact check the information we share. That's propaganda. And it's really good propaganda. But then the way propaganda has been used to justify the degradation of humanity in the ways that we have just discussed, that's what people focus on. And they should, but you should understand, and I hope you understand a little bit better now, that propaganda in and of itself is not a bad thing. Like fire, what you're going to use it for, what the intention of the propaganda is, and the content of that propaganda is what matters. And as we can see, it doesn't matter if you tell the truth. It doesn't matter if you provide verifiable sources. It doesn't matter if you are providing the propaganda for a social good. There are always going to be people who will mischaracterize it as something else because of the propaganda that they have operating in their own head already. So, appreciate you all. Thank you so much. I am going to have my nightcap now and fry me something delicious because Friday is fried food night. I get to have fried food one night. So appreciate y'all. See you next time. Yeah, laugh at them. Do not don't. And this is the lesson for me. Don't feed the trolls. But if you're going to pay attention to them, laugh at them derisively because that just pisses them off even more. And I love that. All right, y'all. Peace.